Okay. Today we're interviewing Jerry Rodgers of Burke, Virginia, and the interviewer is Mike McGregor with the Grand Valley State University's Veterans Oral History Project. To begin, Jerry, where and when were you born?
I was born in Oak Grove, Louisiana, on October 10th of 1946.
Okay, and did you grow up in Oak, Louisiana? Or?
I grew up, was educated in Louisiana through the elementary and school, high school in Oak Grove, and then I went to college at what was then Northeast Louisiana State University. It's now University of Louisiana Monroe.
Okay. And what did your parents do?
My parents, my mother was a homemaker, my father was a part-time carpenter, part-time farmer.
Okay, so I'm sure you grew up having a lot of work to do on the farm?
Sure did.
Okay, so you went to college. Why did you decide to go to college?
Well, that was, it was almost an expectation during that era. You know, your parents came through the greatest generation. They came through the Depression, many hard times, and they wanted their children to do better. So college was really an expectation from both the parents' standpoint and from my standpoint. I wanted to go.
Okay. So you went to college, and was ROTC mandatory in the first 2 years? That
Yeah, it was mandatory. First 2 years, since I'd been a band student in high school, we had an ROTC band, military band in college, so the first 2 years I participated in the ROTC band. And we did local parades and historical events, you know, like Veterans Days and stuff like that.
So from high school you knew how to march already and everything, okay?
Sure did.
And then after the mandatory 2 years, did you decide to stay in ROTC?
Yeah, I decided to stay. I signed into the advanced ROTC program and applied for the ROTC flight training program, for which I was accepted, and took flying lessons through a local flight instructor. The Army paid for it, and I was issued a private pilot's license upon graduation from that course.
And that was what, a single engine qualified then?
Single engine, land airplane, and we did that with the expectation that you would volunteer for flight assignment or flight school when you got into the military.
On commissioning.
Right.
And when did you graduate from college?
I graduated in January of 1969.
Okay, and at that time, while you were in ROTC, obviously you were very much aware of what was happening in Vietnam.
Right.
And what was your impression of what was happening?
Well, I was a news junkie then. Watched the news reports every afternoon after class. Walter Cronkite and whoever was on. I think it was Chet Hutley and David Brinkley.
Yeah.
Hutley Brinkley report. I was very excited about what we were doing. In fact, it's a good time to go ahead and tell you the story of why I wanted to be a medevac pilot. I was watching the news, I don't know if it was CBS or NBC or whatever, but they had a story about aeromedical evacuation in Vietnam. And I saw it and looked at how heroic it was. And I had always wanted to be a helicopter pilot, you know, from the early days of the Whirlybirds. And I actually had
a TV program, right?
I actually had a cottonwood tree at home that I would climb up into and sit in the branches of it and pretend I was a helicopter pilot when I was just a tot. And so when I saw this medical evacuation story, it was so heroic, I said, you know what, that's what I want to do. So I set my aim for becoming a medevac pilot a year or two before I graduated from college, or perhaps even before I went to the civilian flight school.
So that's probably what prompted you to do the
It was very much
flight,
so in my
flight
mind, yes.
track. Okay. Okay, now you were commissioned as a second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant in the armor branch.
On graduation, what did you major in college?
I was a business administration major.
Okay. So you were commissioned as second lieutenant in armor, right?
Right. I had wanted to be commissioned in the Medical Service Corps because I knew that's where the medevac pilots core of them came from. So I asked for that, but unfortunately the school I was in had a large pharmacy department. And they had a number of pharmacy graduates in my graduating class, and naturally they got sent to the Medical Service Corps. No allocations were used up for them, so I was assigned to the Armor Branch. So after I graduated in January, I took a local job for a few weeks, part-time job in the college bookstore until March, and when I went on active duty, went to Fort Knox, the Armor Basic course.
Describe that course.
The Armor Basic was just a general commissioning course. It taught you the ins and outs of the military and introduced you into the tactics of being a platoon leader in a tank or a mechanized infantry unit. We got to fire the tanks, bore sight the tanks. We didn't get to drive the tanks. They had simulators if we wanted to go into a simulator, but they had a bunch of, we called them retreads. They were Vietnam veterans, draftees that went in, probably spec corps, that had 2 or 3 months left of active duty before they got out of their 2-year thing, so they made them tank drivers. And they were careless and reckless, and they would do anything they could to upset the lieutenants in the tank.
Now, I want to just backtrack while you're in your last 2 years of ROTC. Between your junior and senior year, did you have to go to like a
we went
summer
to
camp?
ROTC camp at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, 1967. And it was the first year that they decided to put the ROTC cadets totally in the field the whole time. Instead of the old World War II barracks on base, they moved us to Camp Eagle, which was an outpost of Fort Sill, and we were in 8-man squad tents for 6 weeks. We had 2 major dust storms during that period. It just ransacked the place, and they said it was an experience they wanted to make as close to Vietnam as they could. And after I served in Vietnam, I look back and I never saw anything as bad in Vietnam as Camp Eagle was that summer of 1969.
Yeah. So what did you do during those 6 weeks?
We learned marksmanship, squad tactics mostly. Although we were setting out to be, platoon leaders or company commanders at that point in time, they still went through the individual soldier stuff. How to lead a patrol, how to navigate through the forest or whatever.
Land navigation.
Okay. Search or invasion, if you got captured, how to survive in the wilderness on your own, that sort of thing.
Okay. So that was 6 weeks. Okay, now you graduated, you got commissioned, you did the Armored Basic course at Fort Knox.
Knox, and I had to take a flight physical to ensure that I was qualified to go to flight school. So while I was there,
did you apply for flight school?
I applied for flight school, and so they sent us to a flight physical. Actually, did that the first day we arrived at, I believe at Fort Knox, or close thereafter, because they wanted to get the paperwork going so at the end of the course we could get our orders. So after, I believe that was about 2-month course, and then after that we graduated, had a few days layover and orders to Fort Wolters, Texas for the basic helicopter course.
Okay, so you go down to Fort Wolters and...
Fort Wolters, took another flight physical. Then we entered the classroom, instructions that taught you much of the same thing I had in ROTC flight school, just the basics of aviation, weather, navigation, and then we started flying after, I believe, a couple of weeks maybe. We got in the controls at the first. Since I was not a large person, I was assigned to the TH-55. We called it the Messerschmitt something or other. It was like a bumblebee, but a cute little helicopter. A challenge to fly at first, but once you got used to it, it was like strapping on a pair of wings. It was just a fun
Was that
things.
the kind that had like a glass bubble?
Glass bubble.
And a kind of a open frame tail
Yeah,
boom?
right.
Yeah, okay,
Well, no, it wasn't the open frame. It had a little tubular tail boom.
okay.
It's made by Hughes, and it was a trainer, two-person. It was actually pretty well powered for being, lift per horsepower type ratio, and it was tricky to fly because you had to adjust every movement you made in it. You had to make a counter movement. If you wanted to go forward, you tip your cyclic forward, you had to pull more power. You pull more power, you got to add more anti-torque pedal. If you did that, you had to do something else. It was a constant, not a battle, but a constant challenge to fly at first. But once you got it down, it was like the old proverbial riding a bicycle. You could hover in your sleep after that.
Okay, well, now here, you already have a private pilot's
Uh-huh.
license on, we call it a fixed wing
Right.
kind of thing. I guess that's the right
Uh-huh,
term
it was a
for
fixed
it.
wing.
And now you're going to rotary wing.
Right.
Did you find that there was much of a difference?
Yes,
or-
it was. In fact, that caused me to have some problems. In flying the fixed wing, you adjusted yourself to the cockpit, the horizon, the mechanics of the aircraft. And I got into the helicopter with this bubble up here. You had very few reference points, and I would be flying and I'd be tilting left or tilting right or tilting in and have no inner sense of what I was doing. So one of the instructors said, you need something and I'm not giving you. He said, how about if I transfer you to another instructor pilot and give you a couple more weeks of instruction? So I did that, and I got instruction with a dynamic major named Michael Magno, M-A-G-N-O. And he was just a superb instructor. He knew exactly what I needed, and he visualized. He back took out a grease pencil and marked a couple of dots on the bubble.
Okay.
And he said, see the horizon? Now see the relationship between that bubble, that dot I drew, and that horizon. Yeah. He said, okay, keep that dot right above that horizon where it is now. And from that time on, I fell into it, and
It was that simple.
yeah, it was that simple. In fact, then with my navigation skills and stuff, the procedure was every morning we'd go to the hangar in a bus, and or the airfield, but there were hangars there. And anyway, you'd be assigned an aircraft, and you'd have a stick mate with one instructor. The stick mate would take one of the students and jump in the helicopter and fly off to a stage field, and the other student would jump in a bus and go to the stage field. So after a week or so, then after I soloed, I would be taking an aircraft by myself out to the field because they always wanted a spare aircraft at the field. So my instructor and student would take off. Instead of riding the bus, I got to fly the helicopter, the spare, out to the airfield. So they gave me a little more experience.
Okay.
And-
How long was that training there?
It was about 4.5 months. Went from June. I was there from June to November.
Okay. And then that's, I guess they call that's your primary training?
That's the primary helicopter training.
And then what kind of washout rate did they have?
I really don't remember. It was, I guess you'd say it was significant, but still they had a lot of people that went through there. We had, at the time I was there, we had an officer course every 2 weeks coming in. And I'm guessing on the number, I'm just recalling, I would say we probably had 20 to 30 people in the class at that point in time. At the same time, they had warrant officer classes going on. So I would say a significant washout rate, but not unbearable.
Now, were all your instructors Vietnam veterans, pilots from Vietnam, or?
Yes, at that point in time. At that point in time, I had not had a civilian instructor. All of my instructors were military, and they were veterans.
Okay. And after your primary training, then you
Then we went to
Fort Rucker?
Fort Rucker. And at Fort Rucker, we started out again in, we didn't get a lot of instrument training at Fort Wolters because the helicopter had very few instruments. But I had a little background in instruments from civilian flight school, but so we fell into Fort Rucker, started instruction instruments, had some crude link trainers then, simulators that you could fly in. And then they started us off in the Bell H-13, I believe it was called, the old bubble top with the open tail boom.
Oh,
on it.
okay.
Yeah, and the significant part about that is that we never really got to take off or land the aircraft or hover it on the ground on our own very much, very little. Because the instructor, as soon as you got in, they put a hood on you, and you started to execute a flight plan that you had designed with the instructor in the classroom. And he would generally get everything ready to go and give you instructions to do a instrument takeoff, fly an instrument course, and come back for a landing. And generally, under the hood, he would take again control of it as soon as he got you over the landing threshold as a safety precaution. So we got, I'm guessing, maybe 40, 50 hours in a H-13. And I may not be accurate, I just can't recall exactly.
So it's
We got a
pretty
significant amount of
extensive
hours.
time, yeah.
But that winter was so bad at Fort Rucker that we were grounded day after day after day
Because of
because of weather.
weather?
Although we were learning instrument training, they were not qualified for full instrument flight. So we were actually doing simulated instrument flight in a helicopter. So we twiddled our thumbs in the classroom, got extra training in the simulators, and as soon as the weather broke, we could fly. They flew us day and night to get the minimum number of hours. And what was tragic about it is that many of the pilots at that point in time, I would say most of us did not get a full instrument rating in flight school. They gave that to certain students, and they would get instrument ratings. The rest of us got what they call tactical instrument ratings. And it probably resulted in a lot of people getting killed in Vietnam.
Why is that? What's the difference between the ratings?
The tactical was just enough to get you by and get you out of a situation. If you went inadvertently got into weather conditions, hopefully you could get yourself out. The full instrument rating was just like, kind of like an airplane or commercial pilot would get. It would get you qualified to do takeoffs and landings and fly fully instrument.
So how long did the training at Fort Rucker last?
It lasted about another 4 months, I guess. Got there in November, graduated I think in March.
March of what?
Of 1970.
Not March of '70. Okay, upon graduation, then did you get orders for Vietnam right away, or what was the
Well,
process?
before that, backtrack a little bit. While I was at Fort Wolters again, I again applied for Medical Service Corps. This would be the first time I applied while I was in the Army. So I applied again at Fort Wolters, and sometimes, probably by the time I got to Fort Rucker, or while I was at Fort Rucker, I got a denial of that request for transfer. So I was stuck in the Army branch. So then we graduated from Fort Rucker. We backtrack again from instrument training. We then went into Huey transition. And we had, as I recall, B models, C models, and D models to fly there. So we got tactical training in the Huey, formation flying, landings, combat assaults, all the things that we would supposedly have to do once we got to Vietnam. And that was good training. We had instructor generally and two students again. We of course all soloed by the time we got to Fort Rucker, but we then got proficient in the Huey, and we would take daily flights and training. The instructor would turn the two students loose. They'd go out on their own and land in confined areas on hilltops and do all the things that we should learn to do in a bigger aircraft. So that was a lot of fun also. And here it was a dream to fly. From the first time I got in, it was a war horse, it was a workhorse, it was forgiving, it was just a fine aircraft.
Right. So now you were denied the second time, your transfer to the medical services branch, right? And
So I kind of gave up on that, and I pursued it once I got to Vietnam. If you're ready to go to that portion.
sure, yeah, okay, now you graduated.
Graduated from flight school, got my wings, took 30 days leave, went home and visited family and so forth.
Now, did you know you were going to Vietnam?
No, I had orders already for Vietnam.
Okay.
When you were there, you stood a chance of getting orders directly to Vietnam. Some students, for instance, the aviation maintenance types, if they were going to be aviation maintenance officers, generally they were transportation corps type people at the time. They got to go to I think it was Fort Eustis, Virginia, for aircraft maintenance. So they might go over to Vietnam, like a friend of mine, he went to Vietnam as a maintenance officer, maintenance test pilot. So he was qualified to maintain the aircraft, supervise the maintenance of an aircraft, and then once the mechanics and the technical inspector said it was ready to go, it had to be test flown by a qualified maintenance test pilot. So they would take it up and ring it out and make sure it was ready to fly.
Okay.
But I went straight to Vietnam. The Cobra pilots, if they were going to go to gunships, they got extra training before they went over. Transition to Cobras or whatever. By the time I was there, we didn't have many of the old C model gunships left. They were mostly Cobras and homeowner first. So I got to Vietnam.
Did you know you were going to the 101st, or did you just
I had
have
orders just for U.S. Army Vietnam.
Okay.
And I flew into Cam Ranh Bay. This was about the 1st of May of 1970, somewhere along there.
Okay.
And spent the night in Cam Ranh Bay, maybe 2 nights, and they came out with orders, said you're going to 101st. And okay, as good as any, but it was really fortunate for me for the sake of what I was seeking. So they loaded us on a C-130 the next day, and we flew north. After we were loaded on there was all kind of Vietnamese and family members, and they just stuffed that aircraft full of people.
Mm-hmm.
And flew to An Khie, I believe it was, up in the mountains or somewhere. And that load of people got off, and more Vietnamese got on, who were headed to play Phu Bai, which was my destination. So we flew into Phu Bai, and it's been maybe one night there before they decided that we would go to training. So we had I believe it was a 5-day course. It was called the Screaming Eagles Replacement Training School, CERTS. So you got there and they made you do marksmanship training, qualified on the M16, and I can't remember if we qualified on pistols or not. Being a pilot, we probably did, but I can't recall. So then we had to do some land navigation and night patrols. And first night I was there, this was at Camp Evans, north of the city of Hue. And it was all bus ride. We rode in trucks from Phu Bai through the city of Hue to Camp Evans. And that probably took an hour, so I don't remember exactly how long. And we got there and they put us in this school, and Camp Evans was I can't describe the size of it. It was fairly large, and it had a large perimeter. And the CERTS unit, the training detachment, had a certain wedge of the perimeter that they were assigned to defend with students. So they signed the students to, included a lot of mostly enlisted, to man the foxholes on the border of the perimeter. And they had to assign a officer of the guard. I believe that was the term they used. And guess who got first night there?
You did.
So I got the assignment, and it started getting dark, and we had a little talk that CERTS had that we'd go in to report into, And they had a cadre there of an officer on duty, as I recall, and some senior enlisted folks. These were people who had been in the jungles and had, getting near the end of their tour, so they brought them back in there to give them some easy duty, if you would, until they went back to the States. And while I was there, we got a call that there had been some action outside the wire on the search perimeter. Local Vietnamese apparently had been seen digging a hole or something, and someone was afraid it might be a mortar emplacement or something going on, so they said to the NCO, the cadre NCO said, well, grab the officer of the day or whatever my title was and go investigate, mount a patrol. So we got a patrol together of 3 or 4 men, myself and this NCO, and we jumped into I believe it was one of those old quarter-ton trucks, and went outside. And I was a little shaky because you didn't know what was out there. My first night in not really the first night, but the first night in the tactical area, and here I was having to go outside the wire. So it turned out to be someone was bearing a kimchi pot or something of that nature. I forget what it was, but it was something humorous that we laughed about once we got back. So we finished the course, and the next day the officers had to report to the division adjutant, who had an office there, and he was a lieutenant colonel. I can't remember his name, but he was a real nice guy. And he said, well, Lieutenant Rodgers, I'm giving you orders to the cav. And I said, well, sir, can we talk about that? What's to talk about? I said, well, and I told him the story I just told you about. I wanted to be a medevac pilot. That's my whole goal, was to be a medevac pilot. He said, oh, I can't send you to a medevac. He said, if I do that, I'd be in trouble. We got to have your armor officer, you belong in the cav. And I said, well, I respectfully disagree with you. And I said, if you don't send me over there, I'll show up on your doorstep every morning at 8 o'clock until you do. And he said, you're serious, aren't you? And I said, yes, sir, I'm dead serious. And he said, okay, well, go back to training. He said, I'll talk to you in a day or so. So before I got out of school, maybe the day before I got out, he came out and said, here's your orders, 326 Medical Battalion, Camp Eagle. So the next day we graduated from course, and the medevac unit, Eagle Dust Off, that I was assigned to, would always come up and do a medevac demonstration for the students in certs, including a hoist mission. So they were there to do the hoist mission, and they said, by the way, we're picking you up and taking you back to Camp Eagle for your assignment. And while we were in certs, we had to do a stream crossing. And they was a stream about neck deep, and I was not a good swimmer. I'd taken swimming courses in college, and I could basically swim across the pool without drowning. But we had a rope. We had to get a rope on the other end of the thing and attach it to a tree or something, and attach it, and we all did the rope walk across there. And I was looking back, thinking about how dirty that water was, and there were farmers' fields and water buffalo and stuff around there. About a few days after I got to my unit, I came down with a terrible case of dysentery and ended up in the hospital for days, miserable, at one of our medical clinics on Camp Eagle. So I finally got back to the unit and started my transition into the unit.
Okay, so now your dream is realized. You're a medevac pilot.
Well, not quite yet. I had to again get in-country check rides. And while I was getting into the unit and getting to know people and getting a hooch to sleep in and doing all those administrative things, I was out one day. I'd gone through enough clothes that I needed to wash them, and so I didn't know the procedure for the quartermaster laundry, which I found out later was terrible. So I would wash my clothes in the shower, in the tub, and rinse them out, hang them up and dry them and so forth. And I was out in the shower, and one of our warrant officer pilots, Gary Mercer, ran out to the shower He said, have you heard about O'Brien and Graham? I said, what are you talking about? He said, the crew, O'Brien and Graham and their medic. I said, yeah, I met them the other day. Talked to them. In fact, I talked to one of the medics just that morning. He said, they just got shot down. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, they crashed and burned, assumed dead. So that was the first introduction to what could happen. So we were all shocked about it, although that was not uncommon in the history of that unit. But at about this time, the activity on Firebase Ripcord was cranking up. And it just so happened that this unit was out supporting one of the operations off of Firebase Ripcord when they were shot down, hit with an RPG. And none of them survived. And later that day, one of the pilots, O'Brien and Graham, they were good friends with our check pilot, Dan Smith. So Dan got to, I guess his way of grieving over the loss of his friends, that he was going to do a flyby for them. He was going to do a memorial flyby, which was not really approved by the command. So that afternoon, he and his crew got in a Huey, and we had a two-story hangar, constructed hangar on one end of the little strip. Our little strip was probably 100 yards long, maybe a little more. And all the helicopters were lined up in revetments along the thing. We had 12 helicopters totally in the unit, so at any one moment, maybe 8 or 9 was there. 2 were always at Camp Evans, and maybe 1 in maintenance or 2 in maintenance or whatever. And on the other end of the strip was a motor pool tent. One of the old, how do you say it? They were bowed structures like
Quonset
this.
hut or something?
Looked like Quonset huts, except they were canvas.
Okay.
And on a metal frame. And that was where our motor maintenance for the platoon did their work. So Dan got in the helicopter and they got the crew up, and I wouldn't describe them as having drunk too much, but they might have been drinking. I don't know, but they were definitely grieving for the crew, and they felt they had to do it. And so he came in. He was a very good pilot. He came in over the hangar, dipped down to ground level on that short strip. And he flew straight toward the motor pool tent and pulled up like this, and went up and did a hammerhead, came over and back like this, almost aerobatic, came back and did the same thing in the opposite direction on the motor pool. Beautiful. We were all there. And when they did that, the crew had smoke grenades on the back of each skid on string, so they pulled the lanyards, and the smoke started rolling out. I forget the colors of the smoke, but they did that. And when we got back to when he got back and landed, we had a non-rated major who was a battalion XO at the time. I don't want to mention his name.
Okay.
But he was.
When you say non-rated,
He was not an aviator.
Okay. He didn't have wings.
He didn't have wings, and he was an irritant to the pilots. Just put it that way. That's the way of saying it mildly. So when Dan Smith got out of the helicopter, parked it, and we had a big ditch between the flight line and the administrative and hooch area, and had a little bridge across the thing. So the major was waiting at the foot of the bridge when Dan came across, and he had a copy of Dan's flight orders, and he just ceremoniously ripped them up in front of Smith, which was just a petty act, and had him grounded for whatever. And he was the only check pilot in the unit. And here I was needing a check ride, and we had another guy that was probably pretty new at the time, so we had some check rides that needed to be done because we had to do a check ride every so often. So it could have been more than me, probably wasn't more, but I needed a check ride. So I couldn't get a check ride, so they went over and called the headquarters and got I believe he was a first lieutenant at the time, Fox, who was I believe he was flying one of the generals around. He was one of the generals' pilot, and he was a check pilot. And I think he's also a member of Ripcord Association. And anyway, Fox came over and gave me a check ride, and I passed that. And so then I was cleared to fly. The first flight I had to do was orientation flight. So our operations officer, Jerry Collins, super pilot, medical service officer, took me and a crew, and we were flying out, and he showed me where the fire bases were, where the city of Way was, where the rivers that we would follow, the roads that we'd follow, what to do if we got in an instrument situation. And while we were there, we got a call. While we were in the area, we got a call that said that the recon unit had, where this helicopter our crew had crashed, was a very remote area, and they couldn't get them out of there. No landing place to land. They couldn't extract them by hoist for some reason. So the recon unit said, we have humped the bodies of your crew down the mountain or up the mountain, through a bad situation to get them there. And they were wanting someone to come out and pick them up. So the operations officer said, that's my job, I'll go do it. So my first flight was to go with him and retrieve the bodies of our lost crew. Very somber situation. And that was interesting, and I said, oh man, what have I gotten into, you know? But still, it was such a challenge, and it was such a reward. You know, even though these guys we didn't rescue them alive. Knowing their families were, you know, waiting and so forth, it was just a real honor to be able to do that.
Sure. Yeah.
So I flew as a co-pilot, or Peter pilot as we called him, for 3 or 4 months maybe. And during this time, Dan Smith and his crew, which included pilot Bob Pasco, warrant officer, former Marine, and Dan and medic Randy Hall, who's here at the Ripcord reunion this year, and one other, Casey Pasternak, I believe was his name, was the crew chief. And they were flying in the same area a week or so later. I believe this would have been in June probably, and got shot up. And I think every member of the crew, well, no, the pilot was injured, Smith got sent home, and Randy Hall was shot, and he got sent home. A small arms fire, as I recall. And then Bob Pasco got approved as aircraft commander, got his aircraft commander orders. So I flew with Bob, and I flew with a number of pilots, Alan Swartz, Larry Rosen, Larry Blackwood, and all of them were just super individuals. I could tell heroic stories about each of them if we had the time to do it.
Sure. Now, what was the crew of the medevac chopper, and what were their training? What were their responsibilities?
Okay, you had the pilot and the co-pilot up front. We flew the aircraft. The aircraft commanders were in charge of all the operations. He was the more experienced. If it was going to be a particularly dicey situation, he was probably at the controls. The co-pilot would stay ready on the controls and would operate the radio, talk to the folks on the ground that we're going into, find out who they were, where we were headed, and so forth, help navigate, and would talk to the crew. The medic usually was on, and my unit was usually on the left side rear, crew chief was on the right side rear, and the hoist was on the right side of the rear in case you needed a hoist mission.
Now, you were unarmed?
We were authorized to carry weapons, but generally we didn't. I carried a pistol for a while, and sometimes it was more trouble than it was worth. You know, you had the armor seats, and if you put it over here, you couldn't get to it if you needed it. If you put it over here, so a lot of them worked between their legs. And somebody in flight school said, oh, I wore my 45 between my legs and it saved my jewels. One day a Brown came through and hit me right in the crotch, and the 45 saved me.
Okay.
You know, whether it was true or not, it made a good war story. So one day I had my pistol and a big buck knife I had attached to the holster between my legs. It was comfortable there, but I like to ride with my seat forward so that I could have my arm on my leg and control the cyclic. I had just a comfortable way of flying that way. So one day we were flying into a hot landing zone, one that we entered fast but had to slow down quickly to come to a hover. And I reached back, pulled back on the cyclic, and I couldn't get it to go back any further. And got concerned real quick. And I looked down, and it was that pistol and holster that was interfering with my
Kind of jamming
flight.
it or something?
And I said, "You got it." The other pilot took over, and I took the pistol off. I never wore it again.
Okay.
The day I was shot down sometime later, I had a pocket knife, and that was the only weapon. Might have been a survival knife on board. But
Now the crew.
The crew-
Were they trained medics? Or,
yes, it was. You always had a trained medic. They were trained the same way as the medical corpsmen in the Marine or the Navy would be trained, or the medical corpsmen in the Army to be trained. They had that level of training.
Okay.
And the crew chief was a maintenance guy. He was trained in maintaining the aircraft, getting it ready to fly. And most of our medics would cross-train the crew chief in elementary medical procedures.
Yeah.
You know, how to stop the bleeding, apply a tourniquet, things of that nature.
Did they carry anything on the aircraft that maybe a medic in the field wouldn't carry?
Yeah,
Did
they
you
carried.
have
They
that?
had a medical. He had his regular
Could
kit
they
bag.
do IVs.
We
and things
had
like
we
that,
had a
or-
box full, generally a box full of IV solution, and he had his medical kit, and he had blankets on board, and we had generally 3 litters, the old canvas litters with the wooden handles on. We had 3 of those, generally in racks behind the aircraft against the transmission, and they would, as we would go into a landing zone, they became our eyes and ears, if you would, because you couldn't see behind you very far, but they could. They had we call them monkey straps. They were safety harnesses that were on them with a strap attached to the back and would attach to the floor of the aircraft. And they would get out on the skids as you were coming in to get you clear. So they would bring us into a hover for a hoist mission above the treetops, and we would try to settle into the vegetation of the jungle, usually triple canopy up there. We'd bring the aircraft as close as we could get into the trees without contact with the rotor blades. And they became so expert at it, you working together, they would sometimes have you 6 inches from a tree, your rotor blade tip, 6 inches from a tree to get to the position we needed to be in to drop the jungle.
Now, would they go down with the hoist, or?
No, not usually. On rare occasions, someone would go down, but rarely. The intent was to bring somebody up. So we'd drop the jungle penetrator, and that would be where you would form a reference to hover to keep that jungle penetrator there. And we always told the people on the ground, first of all, do not touch the jungle penetrator. Let it touch the ground first, because if you do, you're going to get a big blast of electricity, static electricity built up in the rotor system when you touch that thing. And sometimes they'd forget that, and you'd see some guy hit it and it'd knock him for a loop. So they learned real quick to let it hit the ground. And then don't move the jungle penetrator. Bring the patient to the jungle penetrator. And often it was a basket, a Stokes litter.
Mm-hmm.
Most dangerous piece of equipment in the Army, except maybe for the emerging heater that you use to heat hot water with. The Stokes litter was so unstable, it would rotate and swing and twist in the air, and it was frightful to ride in or to try to fly. And the hoist had a cartridge activated device. It was a little guillotine. It would cut the cable if you needed to. And our goal was not to cut the cable, it was to get the patient out. But if you were endangering the whole crew and you were tangled up in the jungle with a cable or whatever, you could in an emergency lift a little switch protector and hit the switch, and it would fire the guillotine. It would cut the cable loose. Never had to do that, thankfully.
Now, with the, once you got a patient on board, and obviously the crews may
The
do
medic?
things to stabilize them, and this,
Right.
would they, like you see today, that the EMTs are in communication with the
No,
emergency room?
No,
they didn't have that?
they could have contacted a doctor, but we had a procedure. There was an SOP for that. If it was a critical wound, he would try to stabilize the patient, give all those life-saving techniques, stop the bleeding, try to get the breathing restored if it stopped. Probably put an IV in the guy. If he was in pain, if he didn't already have morphine, he would, could pop him with some morphine or whatever it took. And we had Charlie Medic was at Camp Evans. We would, if that was the closest medical facility, we could drop them in there, and they could have a doctor, a surgeon on site that could do what he could do. Sometimes the medic would say, we got to get this guy to the 85th, which is an evac hospital in Fubai. Sometimes if
a higher
echelon. And sometimes we were actually closer there than not, but you trusted that medic to know what he was doing, and they were all good. And if he said we needed to go to 85th evac, we bent it over and carried him there. And often, sometimes if it was a known brain injury, we'd been known to fly them directly to Da Nang, because they had the neurosurgeon capability there. Why didn't we stop? Well, that minute or two or a few minutes it took to stop at one hospital and get an evaluation, and perhaps then they said, yeah, he needs to go to Da Nang.
Yeah, right, yeah.
You wasted 15 or 20 minutes maybe.
So the medics really kind of triaged
They
that
did.
kind of
They
thing.
exactly
where
what
they
they
went.
perfect
Okay,
word for it.
Great.
They did that, and then sometimes you'd have mass casualties where you'd have 4 or 5 wounded. Maybe some on litters, some ambulatory, and you'd have to bring them in and get them treated. But the medic did the medical part of it. The crew chief did the hoist. If it was a hoist mission, he dropped the hoist down, and at the same time clearing the vegetation, the treetops and the mountainsides from the rotor blade clearance, looking out for enemy fire and all those other things, survival things that you had to do.
I would imagine you're pretty vulnerable when you're just...
We were, and we generally would always have, we would always request, I'll take that back, we didn't always. Generally, we would get gun support from the Cobras, and it was very effective. Usually, if you had Cobras out there with you, they would come around and do a racetrack type pattern around you and fire on any known position. They ground unit would say, we've been taking fire from the northeast or whatever. And so the Cobras would come in and get clearance and say, oh, can we fire that area up? Go ahead and fire it up. So they would start firing it up. And generally, if you had Cobras shooting around you, you didn't get shot at.
Right.
Occasionally, we would have to go in without gun support. It was a risky thing, as I can talk about later, but that's how we did it. And we also did hovering pickups where you'd go into a landing zone and you didn't have a good landing zone to land in, but you could come into a hover, and the people on the ground would bring the patient out to the helicopter and push him up into it and take off. That was a preferred method over hoist missions. And if it was Ripcord, when you were at Camp Evans, there was 2 ships standby there. And we had a little hooch, and an RTO down there would take radio messages, and he would get the calls. And if it involved Ripcord or that area around Ripcord, you just automatically tensed up because you knew the reputation of that place. It was going to be testy. So, and then if it was a night mission, and not only that, a night hoist mission, that was almost horrifying to think about. But you put it behind you, you put it in the back of your mind, of course, but you didn't. You just went ahead and did.
Well, you had to get that guy out.
Yeah, you had to get him out.
Yeah.
That was the mission, and you'd eventually, you'd actually volunteered your life to that mission because you knew it was dangerous. In the time I was there 9 months before I was shot up and sent home. I kept track of the number of killed in action that we had over that 9-month period, plus 3-month period that I would have had I completed my tour. So during the 1-year period of my tour, had I completed it, we had 19 killed in action. 19
from your unit.
from my platoon, from the Eagle Dust Off. Now, how bad was that? In the unit, we had about 20 pilots and about 10 medics and 10 crew chiefs. In other words, we
So
could
about 30 people.
we could man about 10 aircraft at any one time. Although we had 12 aircraft, so we had about 40 people. Out of 40 people of that 1-year period, there was 19 killed.
Yeah, almost
That's
50%.
almost 50, right at
Almost
50%.
KIA. Wow.
It's a strong percentage. A number of those were accidents. Probably 50% of them. We had a crew that went down on 19 December, going into an area in bad weather. Not a whole lot of instrument training. We had procedures that would follow, like if you were behind the first ridge line, which was about, I think it was 2,300 feet, you got caught in the bad weather, you would climb up to 3,500 feet, which would clear the mountain by 1,000 feet and fly due north until you got out of the situation.
Hello? Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, this afternoon I'm open. Starting at 1. Yeah. Well, okay, I can do it like, say 1 and 3. Well, by the time we get set up and do some paperwork and, yeah, so, you know. I'm right in the middle of an interview now, but just a second, let me shut the camera off and I'll get this info from you, okay? Okay, then just send it, 429, that's correct. Yeah, bye-bye. This guy got 2 more people to interview. Okay, so.
But anyway, this particular incident, and it's descriptive of some of the things, accidents that would happen. They thought they were behind the first ridge line because they were trying to, clouds down into the mountains, and you were literally following streams or roads or trails or whatever you could to get to the patient. They had meandered behind not only the first ridge line, but were behind the second ridge line as well, and got to the point where they couldn't make a pickup. They had to get out of there because of the weather. So they went in to the instrument. This is our speculation based upon the crash investigation.
Based on, your best knowledge of trying to recreate it, right?
They apparently did what they were told to do. They climbed to 3,500 feet and flew due north 360 degrees and flew smack into a mountain because they were behind the second ridge line, which was about 4,000 in the area, 3,500 to 4,000 feet as I recall. We didn't find them until I believe it was Christmas Eve that we found the crew, and we manned spare helicopters during that period. Whether we were scheduled to fly or not, we grabbed a helicopter and went out and started looking for them. And it took almost a week to find them.
Wow.
That was just heroic action by this crew trying to save somebody's life, and they flew into the side of a mountain.
Was that most of the accidents that way, or
weather
clipping a tree
contributed.
top or something? Or?
We didn't clip any treetops. I did on one occasion, and I was aircraft commander then, and we were trying to pick up someone on the side of a cliff, and we had very limited area to work into, and in the process of getting the jungle penetrator clear of that cliff to go down and pick the person up and getting into a hover position to support it, I clipped the top of a tree, which is probably 3 or 4 inches in diameter, and hit it with the tip of the blade, right behind the tip of the blade, and it created an immediate lateral vibration where you were vibrating like this as you fly along. And our operations officer, Dave Talbot, super fine guy, friend of mine to this day, was new to the unit. He'd come over from a slick unit, and his only second tour in Vietnam. So he'd been in some other unit, so he came over to us to fly, and he was flying as a co-pilot that day. Although he was senior to me, he would just only been in a unit, had not been cleared as aircraft commander yet. So he was all concerned about, a blade strike. He said, my old unit, you'd get an Article 15 for a blade strike. I said, well,
Right me up.
So we got to the unit and shut the helicopter down, and we looked up, and there were actually splinters, wooden splinters hanging from the blade. It had hit the underside of the blade and made a bulge against the top of the blade. The top of the blade would bulge out, but it didn't go all the way through. And these wooden splinters, so the aircraft techs and came out to check the aircraft out, and he said, gosh, what happened? He said, wooden splinters in your blade. Did you get a blade strike? And I said, no, got hit by a wooden RPG. So that was the end of that story. Nothing happened. It was not an unusual accident, and command understood that the conditions that we flew in,
Sure.
sometimes you just, to get that close to the terrain, sometimes that happens.
To do what you
So,
gotta do. Okay, I'm gonna stop the tape now and rewind. I gotta use another tape. We're almost done with this tape. Okay, so let's start at tape 2. Okay, so you indicated before that you were shot down. Would you describe what led up to that, and
Okay.
what happened basically?
After Firebase Ripcord was shut down and evacuated in 23 July, and I could also talk about that for a minute. It was very
Oh yeah, why don't you? Yeah, sure.
Since we're here at the Ripcord reunion, after I got married up with Bob Pasco, we were assigned to go to Camp Evans on standby. During the week or so before the fire base was eventually evacuated. And we flew patients in and out of there for days, just routinely, folks that were injured. A lot of the activity was not on the fire base itself. Much of it was outside on a couple of hills that we were manning out there. And I'm not expert enough to tell you what all was going on the ground there, except there was some hellacious things going on. I remember somewhere around the 1st of July, I was standing at Charlie Medic, and they'd had a sapper attack on one of those locations that night, and as I recall, they brought in 5 or 7 KIAs into Charlie Medic that we observed, loading off the aircraft and sending over to a temporary morgue we had set up there. And that was just a horrifying vision of those soldiers, who had been active and alive the night before, that all got hit in that attack. I'll let others describe that attack because I don't know what went on the ground. I just observed what happened there. And then we got the order that we were going to evacuate the fire base at a certain date and time. I can't remember how long before that they decided to do it, but the commanding general said we're going to take troops out of there. So that morning we were assigned to go fly in the air, stay in the air up above the fire base or in the vicinity of the fire base, and we would come in if required.
Just on call.
High orbit. We were up there at somewhere above 5,000 feet orbiting, waiting for a call. And so we finally got the call to come in to the fire base to pick up someone. There was a command and control ship that had landed, and he apparently had picked up, from what I recall, had picked up the bodies of Colonel Lucas and Major Tanner, who had been killed, the commander there, Colonel Lucas. And he said, I have one other person I can't pick up. Can you come in and take him out of here? sure. So we dropped in, and there was a Huey sitting here, and we dropped in. And as we were coming in, there were actually mortar rounds falling left and right as we were coming in. They had that area zeroed in, and they'd killed the colonel with a mortar round, I understand. So we picked up this soldier who had told us he had been the radio telephone operator for Colonel Lucas, is what he told us. So we picked up at the same time this other Huey picked up, and they took their passengers, and as I was told, the bodies that had come to retrieve out of there. And we retrieved this guy. We flew him back to Camp Evans and dropped him off. And then we continued to stand by as necessary. That hour or so later, we were called to go out and retrieve some some wounded in action, because one company had been tied up in combat over here, and they had to send another company in to help get them out of there. So one company went in and joined the other company, and we were told to go in, and they had some wounded. And they put up smoke, and they called us. They said, we have set up a little landing platform here they put together with some down logs that we could land on. Kind of come into a light hover on those logs, and they would lift the patients up. So we picked up a bunch of patients. And as I looked through my chin bubble of the helicopter, I saw two captains standing there. One was Captain Rollison, and one was Captain Hawkins. Of course, Chuck Hawkins, the commander of one of the companies, is here at the reunion with us. And Captain Rollison passed away several years ago. But we recognized their rank and their name tags that was there in the hover. We picked their patients up. And there was still a lot of hot activity going on out there at times. We picked them up, flew them back, and carried them to the medic. Finally that afternoon, they got all the folks out of Ripcord. B-52s came in and just lit the place up, and I think we were 12 miles away, and we could feel the rumble of the ground from the explosions going on out there. And about that time, we had some visitors from the units that were on the ground, and they brought us, as a reward for our actions that day, they brought us the 51 caliber Chinese anti-aircraft machine gun that they had captured that day. And they brought it to us as a memento for
your good work.
So we took that machine gun back to the unit and mounted it in front of our little officers club we had there. They had a little garden around the club, and we mounted it in some concrete blocks, and we had the motor pool welded breech so it couldn't be used again. And that was a little memorial we did. So we remember that well, and it turned out it was, the people from the two companies of the 506 that we'd supported that day. Then action kind of quieted down after Ripcord, and then the monsoon season came in, and we had a terrible flood, and we spent days rescuing Vietnamese from a flood that just flooded the area from the beach back all the way to QL1, which is the major road that came from Da Nang through Hue and on up to Quang Tri. I don't know the distance from QL1 to the beach, but it was, a mile or so.
Several. Where Evans was, several kilometers.
Okay, because, but it flooded from the beach on in. The monsoon came in, and I believe it was not only monsoon, it was a cyclone, or I guess that's what they call it.
Yeah, the hurricanes in Asia.
The cyclone had come in, and it was a tremendous amount of rain. The rain just poured and poured. And we flew in instrument conditions, but we would get down on the deck on a road that we knew well, and we just hover literally along the highway. Because if you got up in the clouds, you weren't going to be able to pick up the patient, because you couldn't get back through the clouds to find where he was. You stayed on the ground as best you could, and then if you had to go instruments, you did it after you picked the patient up and had to go back to the hospital. Because generally at like Camp Evans, they had a good Air Force ground control radar there that we trained with daily. And we trusted this guy so much. He could bring us in from out in the mountains. Once he got sight of us above the mountain, he could bring us in right over the threshold to a hover. So if you picked up the patient, it's a good chance you could get him back to the hospitals. So we did that rescue activity. We had some light enemy activity. Then in January, I'd become an aircraft commander, I think in August maybe. Ripcord finished up in July. They made me aircraft commander in, I think, August, and we flew up during that period. In January, the monsoon season was just lifting, and had a good clear day of weather, and we got a call from some unit out near Firebase Rifle that had encountered a booby trap. As I recall it, the point man was out, he had a booby trap, took a leg off, and there was, major trauma going on, and the unit, had a medic that went out to assist, but they couldn't advance very far because there were other booby traps suspected. Not only that, as soon as the booby trap went off, they came under small arms fire, assault. So we got a call that it was urgent medevac. We needed you out here real quick. Guy's bleeding, lost a leg. So we grabbed the crew together, and I got in the aircraft, and my chin strap was missing from my helmet. I was really irritated because it had been on. We'd go out in the morning, we would suit up, put everything on, get in our seats, warm the helicopter up just like we were fixing to go out. And then we would shut down and wait for a mission. And then this was a mission out of Camp Eagle. So I was first up to fly that day. So having checked my gear that morning, I knew my head strap was there. But when I went back out, or my chin strap, when I went back out, the chin strap was missing. Well, we didn't have time to look for it or go find another. We took off. So I was flying with a helmet with no chin strap. We got out there and we circled. We called. Somebody had changed the procedure. We used to be able to call the gun unit direct. Someone changed the procedure and said we needed to go through division artillery before we could go to the Cobras. They were aerial artillery called. So they had to make, I had to call for gun support. My unit had to call by ground line or something over to Divardi and give the coordinates what we needed. So it was a period of time before the Cobras were going to arrive. So they were under fire. It was urgent condition. And I asked the crew, I said, do you want to go in? Backtrack one step. We had 4 people that day, plus an OJT crew chief. He had just got into country, and he was flying with an experienced crew chief to learn how to do the job. I didn't want him to go that day because I knew it was hot. And he said, "Oh no, I got to go." He said, "Please let me go." Troop named Cox, I believe it was James Cox from, I think he was from Alaska. And Bill Malenfant, Sergeant Malenfant was a crew chief, and Specialist Emil Porscheller was the medic. And Bob Nevins was the co-pilot. Bob later became an airline pilot and has retired in the last few years from that. I asked the crew, would they feel okay to go in without the Cobras? Everybody agreed, naturally. They'd never refused. So we went in, and it just settled in for a hover with a jungle penetrator down, to pick up the guy. And we got hit by an RPG, and it was a huge explosion. My lights went out. I don't recall anything until waking up in a burning aircraft sometime later. And I struggled to get out. I was passing in and out of consciousness. That helmet had flown off my head in the crash because the chin strap was missing. My head was apparently banging around. I had fragment wounds to the back of the head, shoulder, and I was on fire. My flight suit was Nomex, but the fuel, we had a full 1,400 pounds of fuel when we took off a few minutes earlier, and it had splattered and drained out all over my flight suit, so the flight suit was on fire. So I was screaming and, praying and everything I could to get out of there. My seatbelt would not release. I could not get it. I guess the tension of the crash against the seatbelt had tightened that catch so that I couldn't pull it open. And eventually I got out, and I don't recall this at the time, but my co-pilot said that he had reached in and got my seatbelt loose to allow me to get out. But when I woke up, I realized I got out of the aircraft, and I'd apparently passed out several times because I remember going in and out. I had remembered a little clearing off to the side down here, and then you're not thinking because you've been unconscious and you don't know exactly, you don't have all your bearings. I looked down at my watch to see how long I'd been out, and my watch had been blown away. I still had the watch case and the band on my arm, but the watch case, the watch mechanism was missing, and it was full of blood. And the thought I had, you're strange what you think, but I had bought this watch at the at the PX, I guess. It was a cheap watch. And the things you think about. Here we are in a survival situation. I was thinking that low down, sorry, blankety blank, that shot us down, ruined my watch. That's all thought it was going through my head. And why am I thinking about this? Well, you're under stress, and
Sure.
you had a brain and head injury or whatever, and you've been on fire, so anything goes. So then I said, well, I got to get out of here. So I thought I had observed a little clearing over here, and if I could get there, I could flag at least to one of the Cobras and let them know. But the unit on the ground knew that we were down, but they had not notified anybody. So our headquarters called out there and said, have you seen our dust off? He hasn't reported in lately. Yeah, he was shot down and then burned. So that alerted the unit. They got 2 crews together. One of the crews was not even flying that day. They just grabbed a bunch of people and said, let's go. So they came out to pull us out. And anyway, Bob Nevins grabbed me. He saw me about to run out through the woods, and he grabbed me and he said, hey, he said, come on. He said, you got to help me. We're going to get out of here. We've got to get horse shelter out. And I looked and I said, what about Melvin Font and Cox? And he said, well, and he didn't answer. He just said, we got to get him out of here. So they loaded, we got another bird that came in, and they loaded Porscheller and I onto a jungle penetrator and started pulling us up, and I could feel his back. He had a hole in his back that I could stick my fist into as I was holding him onto the jungle penetrator. And we went up, and they evacuated us to the 85th Medical 85th Evac Hospital in Fubai. And they went in and they stripped our clothes off, and I begged for a drink of water, and they, no, you can't have any water. They gave me morphine, and I kept begging for water, and I said, hey, I won't swallow it, I just want to wash my mouth up. And the nurse laughed at me and said, okay. But she gave me a pat on the back or whatever, and a glass of water and a kidney dish, and I rinsed my mouth out, and it felt wonderful. And
Excuse me. Hello? It's Mike. Yeah. 4:29. And we're set for 11, right? Okay, we'll see you then. Yeah, bye. That's my 11 o'clock.
Okay.
We got 20 minutes.
yeah,
so.
we'll finish up. So they flew us to 85th. They gave us triage type stuff there, and said you got to go to the hospital ship where they're for burn. Now I did not realize I was burned until I remember burning once my memory started coming back. I remember then being in the fire, but for a while I couldn't remember that. So when we were flying, they put me in the little hellhole seat, we called it, by the transmission, because I was ambulatory, and poor Scheller, they put him on a litter, I believe. And as I was flying back, that wind was blowing across my legs, and then the pain started coming. And I guess I'd been more or less in shock. And then I realized that my flight suit burned and my legs were burning. So they stripped my clothes off and put ointment stuff, gauze on my legs, and we weren't there but just a few minutes, and they picked us up and got us back to the helicopter and took us to the hospital ship. So there they started the treatment on the burns, and my right ear was essentially amputated. It was hanging by a thread, and my nose was crushed, and lips were split through and through. I had a hole through the jaw from something or other. Shrapnel wounds on the neck, and got a Navy doctor in, and he happened to be a plastic surgeon qualified too.
Oh,
so
okay.
he started digging shrapnel out, and it reminded me of a sequence on Gunsmoke where Doc Adams would pull a bullet out and it'd clank into the pan as he dropped it. Well, it was actually clanking going on. So he did everything up, and he said, what did you look like before? He said, well, my nose was all messed up, and he got a mirror up and said, once you look at yourself, he said, you got to show me how your nose looks, and he helped me get it back to normal. So he did some procedures on the nose and stitched me up and pulled that stuff out, and then they would send you to this tank once a day to stop the debridement process in the burn treatment. You had to get all that old dead tissue away, and it was tremendous pain involved. And then they'd give you morphine, but I could not take morphine because it made me deathly nauseous.
Mm-hmm.
I'd take a North shot and I'd just throw up for the rest of the day. So they experimented with a cocktail or two of mixing other drugs with it so it would be tolerable. So I tolerated it a little bit better. And I was there 10 days.
That's on the hospital
On the hospital ship. And once or twice during that period, the troop I went in to save was also on the hospital ship. He sent where he was not ambulatory, so he was in bed with an amputation. He would send word up by the medic to check on me, but I can't remember his name. I wish I could. I did not. It was just I was in such a drug state of shock trying to recover that I can't remember who it was. So 10 days on the hospital ship, they picked us up with Marine Corps. Came out in 46s and landed on the sanctuary, picked up a whole load of us and carried us to Da Nang. And in Da Nang, a C-141 came in and lifted us all out to Camp Zama, Japan. And we were there for 5 days, and their whole focus was on getting us ready to fly, keeping us infection free, getting us ready to fly. And if you had a fever or something like that, they were very cautious about flying you. But we had some very serious patients there, and as I recall, one of which died during the time we were there on the ward. And that was a real, I hate to use the word torture chamber, but you were going through this debridement process and surgery, trying to get you ready, and you were out in an open ward with a bunch of other people. And we had this Marine colonel that had been burned with a bunch of troops in a 46 crash, and he would refuse to cry. And I mean, we were all, screaming and crying and carrying on, just the way it was. And he would not cry before his troops. So they would put saline soaked gauze on your extremities if that's what was burned, and then they'd let it dry, and every 4 hours they'd rip it off, literally rip it off on purpose, for the purpose of pulling all the dead tissue away. So if you were ambulatory, they'd let you go down in your wheelchair or whatever, in my case, to the bathroom and do it in semi-privacy down there. So the Marine colonel, he would go down into the bathroom, and you'd hear him cursing and screaming down there, pulling himself off, and you can take it, Marine, you can take it, come on, well, you can do this, and he'd pull it off. He'd come back to the ward, and you could see where the tears had run down his face, but he didn't do it in front of the troops.
How long were you in Japan then?
5 days.
And then
then the special flight came in from San Antonio, the burn center, and it had been hosed down, cleaned up, sterilized is maybe the word for it. And they came out, they flew us back from Zama to the international airport or Yokohama Air Base, one or the other, I don't remember which one, it was a big air base. And the C-141 came in, and they had troops, medical troops who were carrying us on litters if we couldn't walk to the C-141. They had people on board the aircraft dressed in white surgical outfits, and they couldn't step off the aircraft. They didn't want to contaminate
They didn't
themselves.
wanna-
They walked to the ramp. They'd hand the patients to the ramp. They'd walk, take us in, and put us in. And so I was on the ground floor of the C-141, and I had another litter above me, just about this high above my head. And so they had us full of people, and they gave us medication to make us relax, and that was I think a 14-hour flight. And naturally I had to use a bedpan, which I so far have avoided having to do because I've been able to to go to the toilet. And I thought I'd never be able to do that, and I had to do it. And the flight nurse was very understanding and helped me through the process, but that was just one of the things that came up on the flight. They got us to San Antonio, and well, actually, en route, we were supposed to land at Travis Air Force Base. Travis was socked in that day. They couldn't land there, so they had to divert us to San Francisco International. And en route, they had learned, well, before we left Camp Zama, Port Scheller had managed to call his parents, and they lived in California, that he was coming to Travis. So they were on the ground, to be on the ground to meet us at Travis. And when Port Scheller found out that his parents were at Travis and we were going to land at San Francisco, he really got, upset. So in hearing, his upset, and I was near him on the aircraft, and we talked to the flight nurse, and the flight nurse went forward to the cabin and told the captain what was happening. So he called Travis and had the Air Force ship his parents from Travis to San Francisco to meet him. And that was very touching. So we never got off the airplanes at Travis, except those that were ambulatory might have, but I kind of doubt it because that would have included getting off and trekking through the dirt or whatever and getting back on. So we refueled, and we were on the ground there a while, maybe 30, 45 minutes, and we took off to San Antonio. There they picked us up in the medical buses that had the multiple litter racks in it. Carried us to Brook General, and I was there from, the crash was on 15 January, so this had been about 30 January or the 1st of February that we got to Brook. And we were there, and I went through number of operations to remove the dead skin and debridement. Throw you in what they call the Hubbard tank every day, and with Fisahex solution, they'd scrub you down, and it was an awful procedure. But I couldn't take the medication, so I finally said, you know what? I would rather hurt for a few minutes badly and begin to get over it than to be sick all day. So they started treating me with just common painkillers like,
aspirin.
yeah, that sort of thing. I don't know what the Darvon, I believe, is what
Okay.
one of the things they gave me. And I got to where I would, be able to actually help the doctor. And I had an Israeli doctor that was over in the United States on a joint, what would you call it?
Kind of joint training mission? Or
Right, and
something?
he was there because the Israelis had a bunch of burns and some of their actions they had going on, and I guess the War of '67, and he was training with the American doctors on training.
Got a lot of wounds in armor or burns. Yeah.
And he was a super doctor, and so he would treat me in the tank, and I would be working on one leg, and most of my burns were on the feet and legs. He'd be working on the other, and I remember one day that they brought in 2 or 3 brand new Army nurse. They actually weren't nurses; they were physical therapists coming in the Army. They were brand new, had on their greens and everything. And they came in; they were female, and they came in and they were watching me. And the award nurse said, "This is Lieutenant Rodgers." Said he actually helps to do his own debridement here, as you can see going on. And I looked up at the ladies and I said, "See anything you like, ladies, help yourself." And it made an awkward moment for them. They kind of got embarrassed.
So how long were you in San Antonio then?
We were there March, February, somewhere in mid-March. They released me to go on convalescent leave. So I went on convalescent leave for 30 days. And I came back to the hospital, and they checked me out for this, that, and the other. And then finally, I released me from the hospital in April, somewhere around mid-April. It totally was about 3 months of treatment from the time I was injured to the time they released me. And of course, then I had follow-up treatment because my eardrums had been ruptured and other injuries with the head injuries. So I had to go in for treatments. But they reassigned me to Fort Sam Houston, so I'd be local, so I could go back and forth. So it was several months that I had to go in for treatment, including a liver biopsy, because I had some blood issues that they thought might be liver related, and they saw a spot on the liver and they had to check that out. But during this time, the important part of this was while I was hospitalized, I came to know my future wife, because she had been dating a friend of mine who was in flight school and Vietnam with me. And so when I was injured, he wrote her a letter and said, "Go visit Jerry. He's going to be at the burn ward at Fort Sam." So she started coming to visit me, and she would come up every night and check on me. And so I became very fond of her, and still, arm's length, knowing she was my friend and girlfriend. Right. Well, while I was on convalescent leave, he apparently had written her a Dear John letter. I think it's because he had another girlfriend back home or something. So he broke up with her. So when I came back into town, we got together and started dating, and a year later we were married. So that was the good part of all that.
Now, you stayed in the Army, but you were not...
Yeah, I was not able to fly anymore. I could never pass a flight physical. I got actually a waiver to fly, with a waiver through the Air Medical Service at Fort Rucker, who tested me with a flight surgeon and an instructor pilot and put me through all kind of tests. Still disqualified to fly, but I could fly with a waiver. And the waiver had to go up to the Surgeon General for approval. And it went up through channels. It took months and months and months. In the meantime, Armor Branch was releasing me from active duty because I was a reserve officer and I'd completed my 3 years obligation. I wanted to stay in because I was looking for a career, and they said, "No way. We were overstrength already, and there's a big rift coming up. You're on your way out." Sometimes it gave me a date. I forgot what it was. So I said, "Was there any way to stay in?" They said, "Well, he just told you there was no way." And then he said, "Well, you know what?" He said, "I just heard that Ordnance and Chemical Corps were short some people, and were trying to fill up their slots that they were short before the big rift came, because they were going to lose not only those vacancies, they were going to lose their share of the rift." So I called Ordnance Branch, and I was approved of the branch transfer over the telephone.
Oh, great.
And given voluntary indefinite status over the telephone. And he said, "Yeah, we still have aviators, you're okay." And so by the time my waiver for flight got through the channels, Ordnance Corps became no longer authorized aviators. So the Surgeon General approved it, flight with waiver, and it went to my branch for adjudication, and branch says, no deal. They just took no action on it. So by this time I was already at my new location at Fort Redstone Arsenal, Alabama. I was going through an MOS qualification course in Ordnance, and I finished that and spent another almost 5 years at Redstone Arsenal in the Ordnance, and from there I went to the advanced course in the Rock Island Arsenal, promoted to major there. 3 years later I went overseas as a battalion XO in an Ordnance battalion as a major. Came back to the States, spent a year of training with industry with Martin Marietta in Florida. From that I came to the Defense System Management College, and then went to the Defense Logistics Agency for an acquisition assignment. There I was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, came out on the command list for Ordnance Battalion, went back and commanded the 15th Ordnance Battalion in Darmstadt, which was the 5th Corps Ammunition Battalion. And I had I guess a successful command, because completion of command, I was sent to, was kept in theater for a critical position at the 200th Theater Army Management Material Center. So I became like theater manager for ammo for another 2 years, and which time I made the colonel's list. And I came back to the States, and they assigned me to a nuclear position, nuclear weapons position at the Department of Energy, who actually developed the weapons for the Army, but we had a military detachment as part of that. So I was assigned there, and I completed there 3 years as a program manager for one of the systems. And at the end of the 3 years, I was selected for a colonel level acquisition command. And I had to turn it down because my daughter had just entering her senior year in high school, and she had sacrificed for me all those years, and she wanted to graduate from one high school. So I said, no, this is the time. I will not accept the command. So that set me up for early retirement. So
Okay.
I retired with 26 years as a colonel, and have no regrets.
Well, great. You had a fascinating story, sir.
Fascinating tour, but I look back and I think about the Vietnam tour, and the medical evacuation is the most rewarding job I think you could ever have in the Army. That's my feeling about it. It was just the rewards. And here at this reunion last year, I actually ran across someone that I had evacuated.
Mhm.
Didn't remember it specifically by name, but when he described the mission and I started describing the mission, and it was at the same time of that blade strike situation I described earlier, we married the two up, and we've been firm friends ever since.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're all set.
Yeah.